The morning sun painted the Caribbean waters in shades of gold and turquoise as Isabella Montemayor stood on the marble balcony of her father's mansion, watching the merchant ships drift lazily into Port Royal's harbour. At 19, she possessed the refined beauty that came from generations of Spanish nobility. Dark hair that cascaded in perfect ringlets, olive skin untouched by harsh labour, and eyes the colour of amber that reflected her privileged world with quiet confidence. "Isabella, darling, come away from there," called her duenna. Señora Carmen, bustling into the opulent chamber with its silk wallpaper and mahogany furniture imported from Europe. "Your father wishes to speak with you about the Mendoza proposal." Isabella sighed, her delicate fingers trailing along the ornate iron railing. The Mendoza family, wealthy plantation owners from Havana, had been circling like well-dressed sharks for months, their eldest son Diego particularly persistent in his courtship. She understood the game perfectly. Her father's political influence combined with their sugar fortune would create a formidable alliance. Yet something in her chest tightened at the thought of trading one gilded cage for another. "Tell me, Carmen," Isabella said softly, her gaze fixed on a weathered fishing vessel returning with the dawn catch. "Do you ever wonder what lies beyond the horizon?" The older woman's face creased with concern. "Child, you have everything here. Your father is governor of Jamaica, one of the most powerful men in the Caribbean. You wear silks from Paris, eat from golden plates, and your future husband will provide you with even greater luxury. Why would you think of anything else?" Isabella turned from the balcony, her morning gown of pale blue silk rustling like whispered secrets. The mansion around her spoke of absolute privilege. Crystal chandeliers that cast rainbow light across polished floors, portraits of stern ancestors in heavy golden frames, and servants who moved like shadows to anticipate her every need. Yet lately it all felt suffocating, perhaps because I've never chosen any of it, she murmured, more to herself than to Carmen. Governor Montemayor waited in his study. Imposing man, with steel-grey hair and calculating eyes, that had navigated the treacherous waters of colonial politics for 2 decades. Maps covered every wall, marking trade routes, naval positions, and territories that fell under his jurisdiction. His desk, carved from a single piece of Cuban cedar, held correspondence from Madrid, London, and various Caribbean ports. "Isabella," he began without preamble, not looking up from a letter bearing the royal seal. "The Mendoza family has made a formal offer. The dowry is substantial, and the political advantages are considerable. The wedding will take place in 6 months. Papa," Isabella said carefully, settling into the leather chair across from him, "shouldn't we discuss this? I've barely spoken to Diego beyond formal pleasantries." Her father's laugh was dry as parchment. "Love is a luxury for poets and fools, daughter. You've been bred for this purpose, to strengthen our family's position and secure our legacy. Diego is educated, wealthy, and well-connected. What more could you want?" Isabella felt the familiar weight of expectation settling on her shoulders, like an ornate but heavy cloak. Through the study's tall windows, she could see the harbour bustling with activity, dock workers loading ships, merchants haggling over prices, sailors preparing for voyages to distant lands. Each represented a freedom she would never know. "I understand my duty, Papa," she said quietly, though her heart rebelled against the words. "Good." Governor Montemayor finally looked up, his expression softening slightly. "You are my greatest achievement, Isabella. Beautiful, educated, refined, a perfect lady who will bring honor to our name. The announcement will appear in tomorrow's Gazette." As Isabella left the study, her silk slippers silent on the marble floors, she passed the library where she'd spent countless hours reading about distant kingdoms, brave explorers, and adventures that seemed as remote as the stars. Now even those dreams would be packed away with her childhood things. That evening, as storm clouds gathered on the horizon, Isabella stood once more on her balcony. The wind carried the scent of rain and something else, something wild and untamed that made her pulse quicken. Lightning flickered in the distance, illuminating the churning sea in brief. Brilliant flashes. She didn't know that 3 miles offshore, Captain Blackheart Rodriguez watched those same lights through his spyglass, planning an assault that would change her life forever. She didn't know that her father's latest cargo shipment had caught the attention of the most feared pirate crew in the Caribbean. All she knew was the growing certainty that her carefully planned future felt like a beautiful prison. And somewhere in the darkness beyond the harbor, freedom called to her like a siren's song. The first drops of rain began to fall as Isabella finally retreated indoors, unaware that by tomorrow's sunset, her world of silk and privilege would be nothing but smoke and memory. The attack came with the dawn, swift and merciless as a hurricane's fury. Isabella woke not to Carmen's gentle voice, but to the thunderous boom of cannons that shook the mansion's foundations like the fist of God. Through her bedroom windows, she saw the harbor transformed into a hellscape. 3 sleek pirate ships flying black flags had somehow slipped past the coastal defenses in the night. Dios mío! Carmen burst through the door, her usually perfect composure shattered. "Pirates, Isabella!" "Your father says to dress quickly. We must reach the safe room." But Isabella stood frozen at the window, mesmerized by the terrible beauty of the assault. The lead ship, painted black as midnight with gold trim that gleamed like predatory teeth, unleashed another devastating broadside into the harbor fort. She could see figures swarming over the merchant vessels like deadly ants, their cutlasses flashing in the morning light. "Isabella!" Carmen grabbed her arm, pulling her toward the wardrobe. "There's no time." They dressed hastily, Isabella in a simple white chemise and blue traveling dress, far less elaborate than her usual morning attire. Through the mansion's corridors, servants ran in panic, carrying whatever valuables they could save. Governor Montemayor's voice echoed from downstairs, barking orders to his household guard. But Isabella could hear the fear beneath his authority. The safe room lay in the mansion's heart, behind a hidden panel in the wine cellar. Governor Montemayor had constructed it years ago, anticipating exactly this kind of assault. As they descended the marble staircase, Isabella saw her father for the first time since childhood, without his usual composure, his hair disheveled, his coat askew, his eyes wild with desperate calculation. "Papa," Isabella called, but he barely glanced at her. "Get her to the safe room," he commanded Carmen. "Lock the door and don't open it for anyone but me or Captain Herrera." "What about you?" Isabella demanded, suddenly afraid in a way that all her privileged education hadn't prepared her for. "I'm the governor," he said simply. "I have duties." They reached the cellar just as an explosion rocked the mansion's west wing. Through the small windows near the ceiling, Isabella could see smoke and flames beginning to consume the stable yards. Carmen's hands shook as she worked the hidden mechanism, revealing a steel-reinforced door behind the wine racks. The safe room was cramped but well stocked. Water barrels, preserved foods, blankets, and a small arsenal of pistols and swords. Carmen immediately began praying in rapid Spanish, but Isabella found herself drawn to the single narrow window that offered a view of the harbor battle. What she saw took her breath away. The pirates moved with deadly precision, not like the mindless savages she'd been taught to expect, but like a perfectly orchestrated military force. Their leader stood on the quarterdeck of the black ship, tall and commanding, directing the assault with the skill of a seasoned admiral. Even at this distance, she could see the gold glinting in his dark hair, the confident way he gestured to his crew. "Captain Blackheart Rodriguez," Carmen whispered, following her gaze. "El Diablo del Caribe. They say he's never lost a battle, never shown mercy to those who cross him." Isabella had heard the name whispered in the markets, spoken in hushed tones by sailors who claimed to have survived encounters with his crew. Stories painted him as a monster who collected beautiful women like trophies and ruled the Caribbean through fear and steel. Yet watching him now, she saw something different. A man who commanded through respect rather than terror, whose crew followed him not from fear, but from loyalty. The battle raged for 3 hours. Isabella watched in horrified fascination as the harbour fort's defences crumbled, as merchant ships surrendered one by one, as the town's militia retreated in disarray. Her father's supposedly impregnable stronghold fell like a house of cards before the pirates' superior strategy and firepower. Then came the footsteps above, heavy boots on marble floors, voices speaking in Spanish and English, and languages Isabella didn't recognize. Carmen pulled her away from the window, pressing a loaded pistol into her hands. "If they find us," she whispered, "you must be strong. Remember who you are. A Montemayor does not beg." But Isabella's hands trembled as she held the unfamiliar weapon. All her education in music, languages, and deportment had never included lessons in violence. The sounds grew closer. Furniture being overturned, doors being kicked in, the systematic search of trained raiders who knew exactly what they sought. When they found the hidden mechanism, Isabella wasn't surprised. These weren't crude brigands stumbling through their raid. They'd clearly planned every detail. Probably with inside information about the mansion's layout and defenses, the steel door swung open to reveal 3 men. The first was clearly the quartermaster, scarred and grizzled with calculating eyes that missed nothing. The second appeared younger, perhaps an officer, with the lean build of a natural swordsman. But it was the third who commanded Isabella's attention. Captain Blackheart Rodriguez was nothing like the monster of legend. Tall and broad-shouldered, he moved with the fluid grace of a born sailor, his dark hair shot through with premature silver that caught the light like precious metal. His clothes were fine, but practical. A black silk shirt open at the throat, leather breeches that had seen real wear, boots that gleamed with quality but bore the scuffs of genuine use. Most startling were his eyes, not the cold black she'd expected, but warm brown flecked with gold. Intelligent and measuring. "Governor Montemayor's daughter," he said in accented English, his voice cultured and unexpectedly gentle. "Isabella, isn't it?" She lifted her chin, drawing on generations of aristocratic pride. "I am. And you are the notorious Captain Rodriguez." His smile was slow and genuine, transforming his entire face. "Notorious? I prefer successful, though I suppose it depends on one's perspective." Carmen stepped forward, placing herself between Isabella and the pirates. "Take what you will, but leave the girl be. She's innocent of her father's crimes." "Crimes?" Rodriguez raised an eyebrow. "What crimes might those be?" Isabella found her voice. "My father is an honorable man who serves his king faithfully." "Your father," Rodriguez said quietly, "has been skimming profits from slave shipments and selling weapons to pirates, specifically my enemies. He's also been torturing captured privateers to extract information about shipping routes." His eyes never left hers. "Did you know about any of this, Isabella?" The words hit her like physical blows. "That's impossible. My father would never—" "Your father is a politician," Rodriguez interrupted gently. "Which means he's very good at showing people only what serves his purposes." He gestured to his men. "Search the house. Take what we came for, but harm no one who doesn't resist." As his crew dispersed, Rodriguez turned back to Isabella. "I'm afraid you'll be coming with us, señorita. Your father owes a considerable debt, and you're part of the payment." "I won't go quietly," Isabella said, raising the pistol with shaking hands. Rodriguez regarded the weapon calmly. "That's a single-shot flintlock. Even if you manage to hit me, which is unlikely given how badly your hands are shaking, my quartermaster would cut you down before you could reload." His voice remained conversational, almost kind. "But more importantly, if you kill me, my crew will burn this entire town to the ground in revenge. Is that what you want?" Isabella's resolve crumbled. The pistol felt impossibly heavy in her hands as she realized the trap she was in. Everything she'd believed about her world, her father, her future, all of it was unraveling like poorly sewn silk. "What will you do with me?" she whispered. "That," Rodriguez said, stepping forward to gently take the pistol from her nerveless fingers, "remains to be seen. But I give you my word. You'll be treated with the respect due a lady, regardless of your father's sins." As flames began to lick at the mansion's windows and the sounds of systematic looting echoed through the halls, Isabella took one last look at the gilded cage that had been her world. Then she followed the pirate captain into an uncertain future, leaving behind everything she'd ever known for a destiny as dangerous and unpredictable as the Caribbean Sea itself. The Venganza's deck rolled beneath Isabella's feet as she emerged from the captain's cabin, where she'd spent 3 days in a luxury that rivaled her father's mansion. Persian rugs, carved furniture, even a small library of books in multiple languages. Yet it was still a prison, no matter how gilded. The morning sun blazed overhead as they sailed deeper into the Caribbean, leaving Jamaica far behind. Isabella had expected brutality, violation, perhaps death. Instead, she'd found courtesy that confused her more than cruelty would have. Captain Rodriguez had given her his quarters while he slept elsewhere, provided her with suitable clothing, including a practical dress of deep blue cotton that moved freely in the sea breeze, and treated her with the respect he'd promised. It was unsettling to have her expectations so thoroughly upended. "Señorita Montemayor," called Carlos, the young officer she'd noticed during the raid. His English carried a slight Portuguese accent, and unlike many of the crew, he was clearly educated. The captain asks if you'd join him for breakfast. She found Rodriguez at a table set up near the stern. Charts spread before him alongside plates of fresh fruit, bread still warm from the galley, and coffee that smelled of exotic spices. He rose when she approached, offering her a chair with the same courtesy she might expect at her father's table. "I trust you slept well?" he asked, though his eyes showed he knew better. Isabella had spent most of the night pacing his cabin, trying to process everything that had happened. "As well as can be expected," she replied stiffly, settling into the offered chair. The view from here was breathtaking. Endless blue water stretching to the horizon, with dolphins playing in the ship's wake. She'd never been more than a few miles from shore in her entire life. Rodriguez poured coffee into a delicate china cup, finer than anything she'd expected to find on a pirate vessel. "We should discuss your situation," he said without preamble. "Your father's debt to me is substantial, 20,000 pieces of 8 plus interest." Isabella nearly choked on her coffee. 20,000? That's impossible. "I'm afraid not." Rodriguez slid a ledger across the table. 3 months ago, he purchased weapons from Dutch smugglers, weapons intended for my enemies. When those arms were used against my ships, I lost good men. The debt includes compensation for their families. Isabella stared at the neat rows of figures, her father's signature clearly visible on several documents. The evidence was damning, but what shook her most was the detail about families of dead pirates receiving compensation. Everything she'd been taught suggested these men were soulless monsters, yet here was proof they cared for their own. "Even if this is true," she said quietly, "I had nothing to do with it. Why should I pay for my father's actions?" Rodriguez's expression was thoughtful as he studied her. "In your world, daughters are valuable commodities. Marriage alliances, political connections, social advancement. Your father traded on your value for years, used the promise of your hand to secure deals and influence. Now that value belongs to me." The words stung because they were true. Isabella had always known she was a prize to be awarded, but hearing it stated so bluntly made her feel like livestock being discussed at market. "What do you intend to do with me?" she asked, proud that her voice didn't waver. "That depends on you," Rodriguez replied. "You can remain a prisoner locked in comfort but always guarded, waiting for your father to pay a debt he may never be able to cover. Or you can learn to be useful. This ship operates on merit, not birthright. Everyone earns their place through skill and contribution." His eyes met hers directly. "Even you, if you're willing." Isabella laughed bitterly. "What possible use could I be? I know nothing of ships or sailing or this life. You speak 4 languages fluently, can read and write better than half my crew, and understand mathematics and navigation theory. You've been trained in diplomacy and negotiation, skills that are invaluable when dealing with port officials or other captains." Rodriguez leaned back in his chair. The question is whether you're brave enough to put that education to practical use. Before Isabella could respond, a commotion near the ship's rail drew their attention. 2 crew members were restraining a third, a burly man with cruel eyes who was shouting obscenities. Isabella recognized him as one of the raiders who'd searched the mansion. "What's the trouble, Miguel?" Rodriguez asked, his voice carrying easily across the deck. "Hawkins was caught stealing from his messmates," the quartermaster replied. "Third offense," Rodriguez sighed, standing slowly. "You know the penalty, Hawkins." The accused man's face went pale. "Captain, please, I got debts, family to support." "You have family," Rodriguez said quietly, "because this crew has kept you alive through a dozen battles. You've repaid that loyalty with theft and betrayal. The decision isn't mine. You know our laws." Isabella watched in fascination as the crew gathered. This wasn't the summary execution she'd expected, but something that resembled a trial. Evidence was presented, witnesses called, and then the crew voted. The verdict was unanimous, marooning. "You understand," Rodriguez said to Isabella as they prepared to lower a boat for the condemned man. "This is how we maintain discipline. Not through fear, but through justice that everyone accepts as fair." Isabella studied the faces around her. These men, scarred, weathered, many bearing the marks of hard lives, showed no pleasure in their shipmates' fate, only grim acceptance. It was more civilized than many noble courts she'd witnessed. "Why are you showing me this?" she asked. "Because you still think we're monsters," Rodriguez replied simply. "You need to understand what we really are before you can decide what you want to become." Over the following days, Isabella found herself drawn into the ship's daily life, despite her intentions to remain aloof. The crew, initially wary, began including her in conversations, as her curiosity overcame her reserve. She learned their stories. Carlos had been enslaved on a sugar plantation before Rodriguez freed him. Miguel had been pressed into naval service and flogged for questioning orders. Even gruff Surgeon Thompson had once been a respected doctor, before gambling debts forced him to flee civilization. They were refugees from a system that had used and discarded them, men who'd found family and purpose among these outcasts. It wasn't the romantic adventure of storybooks, but neither was it the savage brutality she'd been taught to expect. Rodriguez himself remained an enigma, educated clearly, with manners that spoke of gentle birth, yet completely committed to this life of danger and freedom. She often found him reading philosophy, poetry, histories of exploration. When she mentioned her surprise, he smiled. "Did you think pirates couldn't read, Isabella? Many of us are former naval officers, dismissed for questioning orders or speaking against injustice. Others are escaped slaves, religious refugees, men who chose honor over convenience." His expression grew serious. "We're not saints, but neither are the so-called civilized men who condemned us to this life." That evening, as they sat on deck under a canopy of stars, brighter than any she'd seen from her mansion balcony, Isabella felt something shifting inside her. The rigid certainties of her upbringing were cracking like ice in spring thaw. "My father," she said quietly, "did he really do those things?" Rodriguez was silent for a long moment. "Does it matter? You're here now, not because of his crimes, but because you have a choice to make about who you want to be." Isabella looked out at the vast ocean, feeling its freedom and terror in equal measure. For the first time in her life, her future wasn't predetermined. It was terrifying. It was exhilarating. "Teach me," she said suddenly, the words escaping before she could stop them. "Teach you what?" "Everything. How to be useful, how to earn my place." She met his eyes, surprised by her own certainty. "I don't want to be a prisoner anymore, not yours, not anyone's." Rodriguez's smile was slow and warm. "Lessons begin at dawn. And Isabella, you might want to call me Alejandro. Captain is for business. This is personal." As the ship sailed on through the Caribbean night, Isabella felt the last chains of her old life falling away. She was no longer the governor's daughter, no longer a prize to be won or traded. What she would become remained to be written on the endless pages of the sea. 6 months had transformed Isabella in ways that mirrors could never fully capture. Her hands, once soft as silk, now bore the calluses of rope work and weapon practice. Her skin had been kissed golden by Caribbean sun, and her hair, cropped shorter for practicality, moved freely in the sea wind without the constraints of elaborate styling. But the deepest changes lay within, in the confidence of her stride, the directness of her gaze, and the quiet authority that had gradually emerged. The Venganza had become her world, and she'd found her place in it through determination and natural ability. She could navigate by the stars, translate negotiations with Spanish merchants, treat wounds with Thompson's guidance, and handle both cutlass and pistol with growing skill. Most importantly, she'd earned the crew's respect not through her birth, but through her contributions to their shared survival. "Signal from the Margarita," called Rodriguez from the quarterdeck. Isabella looked toward their sister ship, barely visible in the pre-dawn darkness, where the flags were clearly readable to her trained eye. "Spanish warship approaching from the northeast," she translated quickly. "Flying Admiral Mendoza's colors," Rodriguez cursed softly in Portuguese. Admiral Mendoza, Diego's uncle, and one of the most ruthless naval commanders in the Caribbean. Isabella felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. This wasn't coincidence. How did they find us? Miguel growled, checking the priming on his pistols. Isabella already suspected the answer, but Rodriguez voiced it first. "They didn't find us. They knew exactly where we'd be. Someone gave them our shipping route." His eyes found Isabella's across the deck. "The question is who?" The answer came with the sunrise, as a third ship appeared from the southwest, the Corona Real flying a flag of truce. Isabella recognized the vessel immediately. It belonged to her father. Governor Montemayor stood at the bow as the ships drew alongside, his familiar figure rigid with authority. Beside him stood Diego Mendoza, resplendent in his naval uniform and a dozen armed marines. Isabella felt her hard-won confidence waver as her past literally sailed back into her life. "Isabella," her father called across the water. "I've come to bring you home." Rodriguez appeared at her side, his presence steadying. "This is your choice," he said quietly. "Whatever you decide, the crew will support you." The boarding plank extended, and Governor Montemayor crossed with Diego and 2 guards. Isabella noticed how her father's eyes swept the ship with professional assessment, cataloging weapons, crew strength, potential weaknesses. Even in negotiation, he was planning conquest. "My daughter," he said, opening his arms as if expecting her to run to him like a child. Isabella remained where she stood. "Hello, Papa." His embrace was forced, political rather than paternal. "You look—" He paused, clearly struggling with her transformation. "Different. I've learned a great deal about myself," Isabella replied carefully. Diego stepped forward, his handsome face marred by barely controlled anger. "Isabella, this charade has gone on long enough. You're coming home to fulfill your obligations. Our wedding has been postponed, but I never agreed to marry you," Isabella interrupted. Surprised by her own directness, "Agreements are made by families, not foolish girls seduced by pirates," Diego snapped. Rodriguez moved almost imperceptibly, but the threat in his posture was clear. "I'd suggest you moderate your tone when speaking to a lady on my ship." "Lady." Diego laughed harshly. "She's been living among criminals and savages for months. What kind of lady does that make her?" The insult hung in the air like smoke from a cannon blast. Isabella felt the crew's tension, saw hands drift toward weapons, sensed the situation balanced on a knife's edge. "The kind," Isabella said clearly, "who's learned the difference between honor and privilege." Governor Montemayor stepped between them, his diplomat's instincts taking control. "Captain Rodriguez, I've brought your payment, 25,000 pieces of 8, plus interest. More than fair compensation for any inconvenience." Rodriguez didn't even glance at the offered chest of silver. "The debt was never about money, Governor. It was about justice for the men who died because of your treachery." "My treachery?" Montemayor's mask of civility slipped. "I serve my king and country. You're nothing but a criminal, who preys on honest merchants. Honest merchants don't traffic in slaves or sell weapons to both sides in a conflict, Isabella said, the words surprising even herself. I've seen the evidence, Papa. I know what you've done. Her father's face went white with shock and rage. They've poisoned your mind. They've opened my eyes, Isabella corrected. For the first time in my life I see clearly. Diego's hand moved to his sword hilt. Enough of this nonsense. Isabella, you're coming with us whether you agree or not. Your reputation is already ruined. Only marriage can restore your honor. My honor, Isabella said coldly, was never yours to give or take. The confrontation might have escalated to bloodshed, but a lookout's call interrupted them. Ships approaching. 3 Spanish galleons flying battle colors. Rodriguez spun to his spyglass, cursing fluently in multiple languages. Mendoza's main fleet. You led them straight to us, he accused Governor Montemayor. I gave my word you'd be allowed to leave safely if you returned my daughter, Montemayor protested. But his eyes showed guilt. Your word, Rodriguez said grimly, has proven worthless before. The trap was expertly laid. The Spanish warships had positioned themselves to block all escape routes, their heavy guns already run out for battle. Isabella could see Admiral Mendoza's flagship, its decks crowded with Marines, ready to board and slaughter everyone aboard the Venganza. There's a way out, Governor Montemayor said suddenly. Surrender Isabella voluntarily, and I'll signal the fleet to let you escape. You have my word as a gentleman. Your word as a gentleman. Rodriguez laughed bitterly. The same word that promised safe passage to the merchant captains you had tortured for information. Isabella watched her father's face crumble as his sins were laid bare before his future son-in-law. She felt no satisfaction in his shame, only a deep sadness for the man she'd once idolized. Papa, she said quietly, I won't go with you. Not to resume a life built on lies and cruelty. You'll die here then, Diego snarled. All of you will die, and for what? This fantasy of freedom? Isabella looked around at the men who'd become her true family. Rodriguez with his quiet strength, Miguel with his gruff loyalty, Carlos with his gentle humor, Thompson with his healing hands. They weren't perfect men, but they were honest ones. And they'd given her something her privileged life never had, the chance to choose her own destiny. Some things are worth dying for, she said simply. Rodriguez stepped closer, his voice low and intense. Isabella, you don't have to make this choice. Go with them, live safely, marry well, have children who'll never know hunger or danger. She met his eyes, seeing in them the same courage that had first drawn her attention during the raid. And spend the rest of my life wondering what I might have become if I'd been brave enough to try. Rodriguez's smile was fierce and proud. Then we fight. The battle that followed was brutal and magnificent. The Venganza and her sister ship faced impossible odds, but they fought with the desperate courage of men and women who'd chosen freedom over safety. Isabella found herself at the center of it all, loading weapons, tending wounded, even fighting blade to blade when Spanish Marines boarded their vessel. In the chaos of battle, she glimpsed her father cowering behind an overturned cannon while Diego fled to his uncle's flagship at the first sign of real danger. These were the men who'd presumed to control her destiny, cowards who commanded others to die for causes they wouldn't fight for themselves. The Venganza couldn't win, but she could escape. Using tactics Rodriguez had perfected over years of running battles, they fought their way through the Spanish line just as a sudden squall provided cover. By the time the weather cleared, they'd vanished into the maze of islands and reefs that only experienced Caribbean sailors could navigate. That night, as they tended their wounds and mourned their dead, Isabella stood at the bow watching stars emerge in the clearing sky. Rodriguez joined her, a fresh bandage on his sword-arm testimony to the day's violence. Regrets? He asked quietly. Isabella thought of silk dresses and golden plates, of safety and certainty, and all the comfortable lies of her former life. Then she looked at the endless ocean spreading before them, full of mystery and danger and infinite possibility. None, she said firmly. For the first time in my life, I'm exactly where I choose to be. Rodriguez's hand found hers in the darkness. The future won't be easy. We'll always be hunted, always fighting for survival. But we'll be free, Isabella replied, squeezing his fingers. And we'll face whatever comes together. As the Venganza sailed on into the Caribbean night, Isabella Montemayor, governor's daughter, intended bride, prize of war, finally ceased to exist. In her place stood someone entirely new, a woman who'd chosen her own destiny and would defend that choice with her life. The girl who'd once dreamed of freedom from her gilded balcony had become a woman who'd seized it with her own hands, and nothing in heaven or earth could take it from her again. Behind them, Jamaica's lights faded into memory. Ahead lay the vast ocean of possibility and whatever destiny they were strong enough to claim from its depths.